here, so. Oh, good to start? Good to kick it off? All right. Cool. All right, and double, ooh. You hear me all the way back there? Is that good? All right. I know there's been audio quality sometimes, so it sounds like it's up and high, so perfect, cool. So a couple of housekeeping things. Who is here for the first time at DevFest Florida? Awesome, very cool to see. Everybody enjoying it so far? Having a great time? Yeah, awesome, that's great to hear, cool. So I am Kyle Paul. I'm the North America Regional Lead. I'm the guy who Hendrix pointed out at the beginning of the day. I was hiding there in the back. So what I do is I look after programs like GDG Orlando here and all over US and Canada. So I get to travel around, get to interface with developers like yourselves, see what's hot and what's new in your community, but then support the communities here. And sometimes I get asked to give a talk. And so today I'm talking about actions on Google. So if you're here to learn a little bit about the Google Assistant and developing apps for the Google Assistant, you're in the right spot. Perfect. And the other thing, there are other things. There's a lot of entertainment here in Orlando. And so my manager doesn't necessarily know I'm here speaking. So if you guys can help me mime out that, approve Kyle's expense reports, that I'm actually here speaking. So I'm gonna do a quick selfie with all of you here. All right, so I'll kind of wave and approve Kyle's expense reports. All right. Perfect, thank you. All right, and I'll get that tweeted out so that way he knows. But very cool. All right, and so a little bit about myself, North America Regional Lead. The other most important thing that every presentation needs to have. Uh-oh. Is it not working? Yeah. Come on, clicker. There we go, cats. So these are my two little kitties, Penny and Jules. Obviously, they didn't come with me on this trip, but little fluff balls. So I know there were a couple other speakers that were talking about cats today, so I had to update my slides really quick and make sure I had a photo of them in there. But yeah, so cats. But so what I was talking about a little bit, some of the programs that we run here in North America are like the Google Developer Groups, which are bringing like-minded developers together to talk about Google tech, programming techniques, startup culture, this kind of fun stuff. So we do this all over US and Canada, globally actually. The other program that I help support here in North America is the Google Developer Experts. And so this is where we highlight and identify individuals in the developer community, non-Googlers, that are experts in technology XYZ. And this is where I'm also here in Orlando seeing, if you're interested in this program, let me know. I'd love to see what your experience is like, your community contributions, and to see if we can get you into this program. It's a very cool program. The other program that we do is Women in Technology. You might have seen like WTM or things like that. So Women in Technology, Women Tech Makers is a program that we run that highlights and empowers women in the technology space and helps and provides resources and access to certain things, other technologies and resources. Then we also have an entrepreneur program called Launchpad, or we also call it Powered by Launchpad. And so these are opportunities to help startups access more Google resources and help grow in this space. And so this is one thing we're looking to do in all of our developer communities around US and Canada. And then Alex, I don't know if she's here still, but you might have seen her this morning as she was helping volunteering. She had a t-shirt on that said Developer Student Clubs. And so this is a club that we set up at different universities all over US and Canada to help these students get access to different Google developer technologies and different programming techniques and stuff like that. So these are all the programs that we're kind of doing. And so if you have any questions about these, happy to talk about those. But today, in my talk, we're going to be talking about the Google Assistant. And so I have 3 goals out of this that hopefully by the end of this talk we can achieve. So show you how important it is, how important voice is today for your users and in the future when you're developing apps. and then how easy it is to build these voice interactions into your existing web apps and your mobile apps. And then talk a little bit about how the community can help come together and further impact and further this journey. So all of you here today can help with this. So, this fun little graph, hopefully you can see it in the back. If not, move forward. But in 2014, as you can kind of see, voice search was not really, I mean, it was very negligible. There was not a whole lot going on with voice search that was happening. And, today it exceeds, 10% of all search traffic that happens. So, whenever you're asking for directions, and this is across all search providers, this is not Google specific. So all search providers where you can use your voice, that's this data that's being collected here. And then, they project, next year, over 200 billion searches will be done using your voice. So there's a nice little spike that's happening here. And currently, they accumulate over 50 billion searches per month using your voice. So a lot of people use it, right? And this is unprecedented adoption of using voice. So when you look at the web, it took 20 years before 50% of the population that had access to the web was using it. And then if you look at the population that had access to mobile devices, it's only been 5 years. And already, over 50% of the population that has access to these devices are already using it. So how fast people are adopting it, how it's become that accessible. It's not just these devices that you plug into your home, it's your phones, your watches, computers. I know he was playing with it earlier. Your cars. You have all these different voice assistants that everybody, at the touch of your fingers or at the command of your voice, you have access to. It's crazy how quickly everybody's adopting. All right, so what are some examples of AI? Any guesses out there? Sure, yeah. Self-driving cars. That's close. I know the blue collar shirt here. Facial recognition. How is that AI?
Being able to determine emotion based on facial movements and gestures.
Cool. And then back there.
Predictive messaging, so when I start talking to sites.
I like that one, yes. And
Dialup Flow?
Dialup Flow, not necessarily. It's a tool. It's not an example of artificial intelligence, but yeah. So,
Financial assistance.
Financial assistance, how so?
Well, they can tell me what to do with my money because they know what I've done before.
And this is the AI doing that?
Sure.
What's an example of a financial assistance AI?
Well,
or are you just throwing out that this is something that you can do with it?
I know that some banks do this thing. I don't use it now, but some banks they tell you, look, we notice that you've been spending this money. Based on our calculations, you can overdraft. So I'll do this.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that's good. Awesome. So a couple Google examples of this are within Google Maps. Example. So anytime you're searching for directions, it uses artificial intelligence because it's crowdsourcing the traffic and using that kind of information to determine here's the better route for you. So that's artificial intelligence happening there. And then Gmail spam filters. We have artificial intelligence built into that to where, it's, as an email is coming in, this is, helping you, clear up that, get to that inbox zero, so that way, any messages that are coming in, you're not necessarily hitting. Another fun one is, who here is a big Netflix fan? Yeah, all right. So that watch next queue, that's artificial intelligence based off of your past likes, your past watches. And it's not necessarily if you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, it sees like how long you watched it. And so that all of this data comes together, then is what they determine to show you, what to watch next. So that's an artificial intelligence there at work.
What kind of intelligence tells you to stop watching?
To stop watching. I don't know if they built that one in yet. But yeah, that's a good one. They do have the "Are you still watching?" But I think that's just because you've been watching too much. But yeah, so sometimes, and so this is one thing that with movies and stuff like that, we sometimes accidentally confuse AI with robots. And so AI is not a robot; it's the brain part of the thinking aspect, because and some people also confuse it with machine learning, and so this is where you don't want to cross that. Machine learning is actually what is taking in that data, analyzing it, and then creating predictions off of it. Artificial intelligence is making decisions on that data that machine learning output. So that's where you can separate those two. And so it's the brain, not the body. Whenever, so sometimes Hollywood messes that up a little bit. So just wanted to make sure to clarify that. So I know, like you mentioned back there, like Gmail's Smart Reply, where it gives you that predictive, like fills in the blanks and stuff like that. So that's, helping you respond quicker, and based off of the data that it's learned on how you respond in questions and stuff like that. So, and then you mentioned driving a car. It's helping you make those decisions, stuff like that. Cool. And so what is an AI assistant? And so an AI assistant, and I'm trying not to block the screen too much here, so I know over here it's a little difficult, sorry. But an AI assistant is kind of in the middle here, where you takes in voice, text, so it's that user input that comes in, or it takes in data from sensors, or it takes in from various sources. So it's either a Google search, APIs, all this different stuff, and it outputs to do an action, or it provides you an answer, or also follow-up question. So, I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that, or can you clarify something? And then it can go back through, so it creates that conversation that happens. And this is, sometimes you might think of this as a chat bot, where, it's a little bit different because it's only taking a certain kind of input, but it's not necessarily just for entertainment. It's actually helping you get to that action point. And so in order to do this, you design a VUI, a voice user interface. And so those of us who are developers, you're probably more familiar with a GUI, a graphical user interface. And so this is where it's very different when working with the Google Assistant. It's a voice user interface, and when you're navigating with voice, it's a conversation. It's not like a graphical user interface where you can go and decide to click somewhere randomly or select text or things like that. Because in a conversation, I can't select the words that you're about to say, or I have no idea what you're about to respond to me with. So it's a conversation that's happening. I have no idea what question you're going to ask me next. So how you design that user interface is a much different style. And the other thing you have to keep in mind when you're designing this voice user interface, since the user can't navigate outside of the controls that you've provided, the user is kind of captive in this. So you have to be very careful with how you're setting up this conversation. And one way to help create a better user experience is through creating a persona for your users. And this is a consistent character that captures the voice and the interactive experience of your users. So let's say you're creating an app that does business meetings and stuff like that. You don't really want an app that helps you schedule things that the voice is making all kinds of slang words and things like that. It's a very peppy voice or whatever. You just want something that's very straightforward, providing feedback back and forth. Or let's say you're creating a pizza app and you want to have fun with your users and stuff like that, but if it's a very boring, monotone kind of thing, it's like, what is there to entice the users into this? Or if it's a game, you want that to be fun and enjoyable kind of thing. So you want to come up with this persona and the words that you're using in the conversation. So some things to keep in mind is avoid using a written language. So you want to talk with how you're speaking to somebody. So not necessarily does that mean use bad grammar, but that means use a conversational voice. Don't write the conversation as if you're writing a book, kind of thing. Use conversational markers, which these mean like let's say you're stepping the user through an ordering process, and so finally we need your payment information, or whenever they respond with a queue, you're like, got it. And then you move on to the next thing. Or whenever you're challenging the user, you're like, good job. Providing them these conversational markers as part of the next step of the process. And you want to make sure you're balancing your business goals with user expectations in this. So like obviously, as part of this process, you want them to either make a purchase or complete an order, or you want them to play the game. So these are your business goals, but you have the user expectations of how they navigate it. You want this conversation that they go through. And yes, there are some devices, assistant devices out there that have a screen that you can talk back and forth through, like your phones, the new Nest Hubs that Google has put out. So there is a visual interface, but there are so many devices that don't have a visual interface. So you got to keep in mind that the user can't necessarily see where you're going to be showing them next, or any cues that are happening. So how you engage with the user, these VUIs are invisible. So your user can't necessarily predict what comes next. So you have to be, this is how you're organizing the conversation. So yeah, cool. So here's a use case. So I mentioned pizza app, but then you also have an app that schedules the bus. Anybody, like, how will ordering a pizza be different than asking for the bus schedule? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Yeah, sure.
Pizza is usually customized.
Customize
what comes on
the toppings and stuff like that. So you're asking different questions, and then with the bus,
it's just returning information, like it's already set.
Yeah, it's reading back from an API that, oh, the bus is going to arrive at this time to the stop that you've requested, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So you see how even my voice changed when I was like, oh yeah, pizza toppings, and then, oh yeah, the bus is just going to read back what time I'm going to be ready. So these kind of personas kind of happen a little bit differently too. So it's beyond who the brand is, but what is the state of mind that the person is when they're using it. So when you're ordering a pizza, it might be something like, oh, I'm hungry. I want some food. And then when you're looking up the bus schedule, it's like, I want to get home from work. I don't care. Don't make it fun. I just want to get home. That kind of stuff. So, this is where you have some language like, cowabunga, dude, let's get some pizza. And then, what flavors do you crave? So it's not like what toppings do you want on it, it's something more fun, like what flavors are you craving right now? What kind of pizza can we get you? And then the bus, it's like, it's approaching your stop now, don't worry, it's coming. And then, your trip is gonna take 45 minutes. So giving them the pertinent information, so this is helping that persona come across as well, because it's the same actions that's happening back and forth. It's professional, it's restrained, the info's getting there, and we're good to go. And then here you have the same exact actions. So they're completing a purchase, they're giving an update, and you see, I don't know if you can see there in the back, but buy and purchase, getting and arriving and look at and review are all bolded here. And so it's the same exact action, it's just the language and the difference in this language, but it's the same exact conversation that's happening between both apps. And so, again, remember the state that they're in, how they're using your app, these kind of things. And the other important thing is don't necessarily go there in the conversation for that sake. Be authentic to your brand as well. So if your brand is, Cowabunga Dude as a bus, awesome. But, incorporate that as part of the language and stuff like that. Don't just go there because, you want to be fun with your users, kind of thing like that. So we keep it in line with your brand, but then also it's a conversation. The other thing is to think outside the box, literally. And what I mean is, whenever you're developing it, it's tempting to go with the typical coding style. So we come up with a decision tree, this is the happy path. This is how we get our users into that happy path. And then we go code, 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 code. Don't do it. I promise you, don't do it. That's not gonna provide a great user experience. You're gonna see a lot of loopholes, people are gonna be not using your app, or they're gonna be breaking your app all the time. And even you trying to use it, you're gonna have a bad time, after you've built it all out. Because you can't anticipate these conversation paths and how they're gonna work out. And so, and as I mentioned before, there is no happy path in a conversation. So we could be sitting here chatting, and then next thing, I get an idea that pops in my head, and I'm asking you about the bus schedule, and the next thing you start talking about pizza, and we're on a totally different topic now. And, you know, I'm an app that only talks about bus schedules, and I have no idea how to respond to pizza now. So it's like, how do I work through this conversation? How do I reset the conversation back to helping you on the bus schedule? These kind of things. Or vice versa. I'm trying to get you an order of pizza, and you're starting to talk about the bus, and you know, why is it not here yet? These kind of things. So what you want to do is create a dialogue first. And so the best example that I can provide for this is, you know, you have your app idea. So you're right up here front, so I'm going to be pointing at you. So, all right, so you come up with this great app idea that revolutionizes how people order pizza. All right? Likely? Yeah, very likely? All right, cool. So he has this great pizza idea. And then we're going to pick on you two here. All right? So what you want to do then is, you're not part of this. All you're doing is just going to sit and observe. And then they're going to talk. So you assign one to be the pizza bot, and she's going to be ordering a pizza. And you observe how that conversation goes. And, you know, so you can have some pre-canned responses for him to provide as part of this conversation. But she's going to walk through it. You don't have to actually do this right now. They're getting all prepared up here. No, I see some worried faces, but you know, in this scenario, you want to sit down two people who aren't working on the app. So friends, family, you know, find two people on the street that are willing to help out, or two other people here at a DevFest, and you know, sit down and talk. All right, you have this role. You're somebody that's ordering a pizza, and that's all the context you give them. And then somebody else is, you give them context of, you know, here's a couple responses that you can have back, but here's your goal, to get somebody to order a pizza. And then observe how that conversation goes. See where it winds, because that's gonna help you develop that dialogue, and then you create that structure. So you're still not gonna ever get to a happy path on the structure, but you'll see and anticipate twists and turns in this conversation and see how an actual conversation happens rather than trying to code a conversation as you think it would go. So whenever you're building an action for Google, you'll remember this. The other thing to remember is, in conversation, there are no errors. So, you know, as we've been, you know, we have a lot of eye communication going here, and he's not melting down because he thinks I'm about to ask him a question. He's like, error, I don't understand what you're about to say. Like, his head just didn't explode. So there is no error in conversation. All of you are understanding what I'm saying. There's a lot of noise next door. There was a band that just went through a little bit ago. I don't know if you guys heard that, but you know, there's all this extra noise that happens. There's the pop of the speakers. There's sometimes I talk really quietly. You know, there's all kinds of random things that can happen in a conversation, or in a household, or in a car. Or I mean, so you can't anticipate every single error. And so when you're having this conversation, there are no errors in this. And so this is where, you know, like, these are real life user interactions, conditions. So sometimes I get interrupted, or sometimes, you know, like, I had to interrupt my story because they were getting very worried up here, but, you know, I was able to get right back in it. There's hesitations, and there's background noise. There's all this, somebody coughs very loudly or sneezes, and you have all this extra noise that the assistant is listening to, and has to filter all this out. And so whenever there's a long pause, sometimes happens too, and it's like, how does the assistant handle this kind of stuff? And so these are things that you have to anticipate in the conversation, like, oh, I'm sorry I didn't catch all of that. Or, you know, you have to come up with different ways to make sure that your application doesn't fail. Because I don't know, there are some other assistant devices that when they error, it's the same error that it provides back every single time, and it gets very annoying to the user. And so you don't want to do that. You never want to, you know, provide this, I didn't understand you, or I don't understand you. You never want to say this back to your user, because then they're going to just repeat the same exact thing again. I want to order a pizza. I don't understand you. I want to order a pizza. And so that's not changing their question. They're not going to come back and, you know, try to ask it a different way, because that's not how conversation works sometimes. They want, like, my goal is, I want to order a pizza. Why don't you understand this? So I missed out on the pizza earlier, so I'm like stuck on pizza right now. But yeah, so with this whole thing, like you want to come up with different ways of responding back to the user to keep them engaged if there happens to be that error, because you want to put them back on the right path. Let's say they got distracted or whatever. And so, you know, you have to give credit to your users sometimes. They might not use the best language, or they might not know how to speak clearly, but they know what they want. They know what they want to get to. So you have to help them get to, get to their goal. And sometimes they don't necessarily understand the prompt. Instead, so this is where you can do like leading things of like, hey, what kind of, thanks for opening up Tulio's. Did I say your name right?
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Tulio's pizza place. What kind of toppings can I put on your pizza? And so like right there, you're giving them an action to complete next. And so you're opening it right up and going towards that happy. There we go. Towards that happy place. And so this way, it kind of maintains the context and then gets them set right on that path. And so, as I was talking about, with these errors that you can't necessarily anticipate, there are hesitations that happen sometimes, or there's corrections. And so when an error occurs in this is where you can use it as a new turn in the dialogue. So, like you started talking about laundry, and like, oh, I'm not sure I could put socks on a pizza, but how about we figure out, like, do you want some pepperoni on that? And, so you turn it back instead of like, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Like, that doesn't help get back onto that path. So you use that as an opportunity to get them back on track to placing that order. And then, as I've been saying this whole time, this is a conversation, so you want to keep it natural. You want to keep it comfortable for the user. So that way, like, I'm sorry, I can't do that, but how about, give them an opportunity, like, would you like some pepperoni on that? And then if they say no, then you can respond with, oh, well, what kind of toppings would you like on your pizza? So like, it brings it right back in to helping with that. So treat it as an input, not as an actual error. Cool. And remember, users have an intent. They know what they want. They know what, they're using your app for a reason. So they know the goal that they want to get to. Different errors require different strategies, but so as you can see here, the user has this intent. It's in that little cloud in their brain. They know what they're thinking of, and so you have to figure out what's going on here. So the user gives a voice command. That audio file gets turned into text with an intent detection. The user intent gets processed. A signal comes back, and it either does the voice response or goes out to these peripherals. But so what it has to do is pick and choose like what's actually in the voice command that they provided that's actually part of that intent. There could be a bunch of filler words that they said, but like I heard pepperoni, I heard pizza, I heard cheese, and so you pull out this context, and that's the intent that they want on it. And then I have another fun example here. Hopefully it works. What is the weather?
It's 58 degrees and cloudy in Oviedo.
Perfect. Cool. It worked. So you heard that, right? So I asked, what is the weather? And it gave a response of degrees, the location I'm in, and the time of day. So it's like, it was all based on the time of day, right?
So if you just say weather, you'll get the same response.
So, yeah, similar, yeah. So it pulled the context weather. But remember back to one of my earlier slides when I said it not just my voice input, but it took other things from the peripherals, so it knew my device. So my device has a GPS location on it, so it knew I'm here in Oviedo. It also knows the time of day is 3:40. So it knows that the current temperature is what I'm looking for. It doesn't know, I didn't ask what the high is for today. It didn't give me that. The other thing it didn't do was, give me both Fahrenheit or Celsius. It already knew my preference is Fahrenheit, so it took all of this context out of what I had. So you have to also anticipate all that as part of this. So there was the city, the time, the date, Celsius versus Fahrenheit. There's all of this different things that with the device, you can help build into your response to get a better, more accurate response. So as I was talking about, using the environmental aspect. So I was asking the question on my phone, and so it was able to use the environmental APIs from my phone to help build a better response. Situational. It doesn't necessarily know I'm giving a talk, but weather's not like that important of how to provide a response. But you know, let's say the time of day, like I'm getting ready to go home from work, and so it knows that, you know, when I'm requesting the bus schedule, it knows how to frame that response. And temporal, like what did I ask before? So as you're going through your application, you're not necessarily going to pull out that, you know, I was asking for pizza and now I'm asking about the bus schedule with a completely different app. It's not going to necessarily know that I just ordered a pizza, but it's meaning through the conversation. So like now we're on cheese type, and so it knows that the next thing is going to be toppings, and then the previous thing was the crust that I picked. And so like that's what it means in the temporal aspect there. What happened right before, what's happening next. And then behavioral, like what do users know going into this? So it knows that I'm ordering pizza, and so that's the goal, and so how you can help establish that as part of the persona in the conversation. So they have that context. Cool. And so this is, you know, so that was all like generally how different virtual assistants work and how artificial intelligence all ties in. So now with the Google Assistant, so what it does is it's on, you know, I think we're like 10 billion devices, 100 billion devices. I'm looking at me right here. He used to be on that team, so so it's a very big number on the amount of devices that the Google Assistant works on. And so you have phone, speaker, watch, laptop, all these different things that I was mentioning. It's in TVs now. It's where you can just, you know, ask the TV to open up Netflix and start playing, you know, Stranger Things, these kind of things. Cool. And as a developer platform, so we have actions on Google. And so this is where we enable you, the developers, to build on top of the Google Assistant. And there's a whole range of things to extend this functionality. And so as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, it's like how to extend your Android app, extending your web content. So we have different paths set up to where if you go to the website and you're looking to extend the features of your Android app with voice interaction, we have a path set up with documentation strictly for this. If you want to extend the functionality of your web app, we have a path for that. Or if you're just wanting to create an assistant app that's a standalone, that doesn't have necessarily tied to a website or an Android app, we have a path for that as well that you can go through. 3 times the size, but we have a lot of starter example apps, like building flight interactions, like booking a ticket on a flight, or looking for news, healthcare, education, gaming, food. Like there's all kinds of like conversational things. There's all kinds of examples that are set up that you can start with and then build on top of and make it your own. So there's over 100 different examples that are already out there that you can build on top of.
Is there a methodology for making one depend upon another? Like, so like embed like an SDK in one. So say I wanted to build in a bus schedule and include a bus schedule library or interface to it. Their intent into my other one that's like planning a trip or something.
The question is, is there anything out there to combine one app to another app? So like a bus schedule to something planning a trip?
Yeah, so like Oviedo say has a bus scheduling app.
Yeah.
That has all these intents, this public API to the intents. Can I like, is there a way, I don't know, can I like load that in like an SDK into another one and give my own interface to it to make like package up, like make the packages?
Okay, so you're not necessarily connecting 2 different voice apps. You're connecting somebody else's API into yours.
Right, I want to connect their voice interface, obviously, but not voice, it would be code, into my voice interface that does 3 other things match up, kind of thing.
Gotcha. You wouldn't incorporate their voice, but you can take in their API.
Okay.
So.
There's an app that uses it's called Advisor that uses the New York MTA bus schedule, and it takes the information from the MTA website on their API and it runs on the cloud, and it's fully assistant.
Okay.
So there's something out there that you can see.
Yeah, so you can consume the API, you're just not going to take their voice library, that the conversation that they have set up. So especially with Google Assistant, it's siloed. So like he's creating a pizza app, you're not going to be able to see his conversation from the pizza app and incorporate it into yours.
Okay.
So, but if
Or build on top of it, like tunnel it through or something.
no, we don't have. Yeah. No, there's nothing available currently for that. But that's an interesting idea there. That's interesting. I have to think more on that one. That's a good one.
How do things work? So, like when I ask Google Assistant that I want to play a game, and then she kicks me off to another assistant, can that assistant not return data back to Google Assistant? So if I say, hey, look, I want to order pizza, the thing is like, cool, I'm gonna go figure out which one you want, and then kick me back to the other assistant that launched that one. So they really would be connected to several things.
So you're saying you want to play a game, and then you come back to the assistant and play a different game? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I want to kick off one assistant with an intent to solve one problem, but I want my original assistant to get the answer back from that problem. Can I do that?
No, that's the same kind of
Right.
that's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, they're like 10 use cases.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, they wouldn't be able to take an output from another one and
Yeah.
input as an input to another one. No, because it's a siloed app.
Yeah.
To where like how I've asked you a question, you provided me an answer back,
Sure.
and then as the user, I then go to the next app, provide it that
Okay.
context.
With that little soundproof room,
Yeah.
voice bars in it.
Yeah. Interesting questions. Cool. One way to make this easier, so we do have a lot of these code examples already preset and stubbed out for you, but we do have a tool called Dialup Flow that is a graphical user interface that allows you, that helps you develop these conversations and build these intents out and how the values and the responses. And it's a lot of machine learning built into the back end of it. So as your users use your app, it helps build that conversation and the responses back to your users. So that way, some people call a pizza a pie. And so these are things that it can help build into the conversation. So the user intent is to order a pie. Well, that's not necessarily how you built your app to recognize what people want to order. And so it's coming up with different words for things. So like there's other names for pepperoni. Instead of saying cheese, they say mozzarella. These different types of things, like how you can build and bring these intents together. And so that way it helps your app understand the context of this conversation, but then also provide better rich answers through the machine learning provided here. And so this is an example of how Dialup Flow sits in here with building this conversation. So the user says, find me a recipe for homemade cannoli. And I'm asking the Google Assistant for this. And then it sends, find me a recipe to homemade cannoli to your application that was built in Dialup Flow. Dialup Flow pulls out the entities homemade cannoli. I know it's difficult with the podium here, sorry. But it pulls out homemade and cannoli. So these are the intent and like what we were talking about earlier, like this is what the user is trying to do, find homemade cannoli. And your application is a recipe app. Sorry about the context there. And then so you hit a webhook that pulls from your database, homemade cannoli recipes, and then responds with, here's the best one I could find, and serves that recipe back up to the user. So that's where Dialup Flow comes in and helps you find the entity out of that whole conversation, identifying the intent and what it is that they're looking for here. Cool. And so, as I mentioned, there's machine learning that's backing Dialup Flow here that helps provide examples of what your user might be asking and then how they interact with your product and then serve that back up later. So an example here, I want to book a flight from Los Angeles to Hawaii for less than $300. And you see that there's 3 different colors here, and I don't know if you can see it there in the back, but in the JSON that Dialup Flow sees, it pulls out GeoCity as Los Angeles, GeoState, US is Hawaii, and then the price is an amount of $300 and the currency is USD. So as the user, I didn't say any of that, but based on the learning, the machine learning that's happened and how users are using your app, it knows that Los Angeles is a city, but if I said LA, how's that going to translate? Because LA, yes, we do, a lot of us recognize that LA is still a city, but it's also Louisiana's abbreviation. So, there's that. And then Hawaii, did I mean the city or did I mean the state here? Or with $300, you know, the dollar sign is also CAD for Canadian. They also use the dollar sign. Same thing in Singapore. They also use that same dollar sign. So how you're typing and how you're using, so you have to use this other context from your users as well to build up this response. Helps you build it up. And then some fun resources here. And so this is a slide to take the picture of. So it's got a link to the learning more about the Google Assistant, learning more about how to develop actions. And so these examples I was talking about that that set it up for you and that you could build on top of. And then Dialup Flow is actually the console where you can start building these applications. And then if you want to learn more about how to do all of this and how to build your own from scratch, we have a lot of code labs that step you through. And so it's codelabs.developers.google.com that step you through starting out and creating your very first action and, you know, building it all together and stuff like that. And there we go. Cool. That was like nose. And that's me. So the other thing that we did, you know, I mentioned before that, you know, helping support Google developer groups all over the world. We ran a campaign in 2018 that taught developers like yourselves to build their very first action on Google. And so now there's, you know, hundreds of thousands of developers out there. And so, you know, if you're interested, there's a lot of other developers. I believe the Orlando community and I believe Bronx ran this campaign as well. And so, like, there's a lot of other developers here who have some experience building this out. And so reach out to your local developers. If you're interested in running a campaign to kind of help build something together, ask Hendrix and the rest of the GDG team here on running that again to try and get everybody to learn on how to build an action together. So it'd be very fun to see. And again, with that, that's me. Thank you very much. And I know we took questions during, but I don't know if I'm getting kicked off yet or not, but sure.
Is there any audit information? Let's say I'm developing this app for a pizza place, right? And
Okay.
then basically they want to be able to do it. Somebody says, well, I didn't get the order. Like, what kind of audit information can they have available?
So the question is auditing of the information available?
Order information, like
Order information.
audit.
Okay, and audited information. Well, that's really up to you because what's happening is back to this screen here. All right. So when it comes into Dialup Flow, there is a log in Dialup Flow of the user interaction. It's not necessarily personal information or anything like that, but you do have a log here. But this is the more important part. So the webhook is something that either you've created or an API that you've tied to. And so that's where you can store some of that information in your database. As far as, yes, an order was created, and you store it. And so that's how you can build on top of that.
But I cannot get like the recording or anything like that, right?
No, the actual recording or anything like that, no. You can listen to it in developer mode, but once you publish it, you're not gonna, you know, be able to listen to the person's voice or anything like that. You will have the text that came through Dialup Flow. But, oh, yeah.
When it comes to creating these actions in the assistant, is there some sort of steps that you can go through to help them understand different actions? Because one person from one country or even one state, a person from one state might say something different from another person.
Right.
Might be confusing for the system to understand what is happening.
Gotcha. So the question comment is, you know, sometimes people have different accents and different languages and stuff like that. So that's not necessarily up to the app, that's up to the assistant to get better at. And so the assistant is learning all the time. So there is a user profile built into the assistant. So I don't know if you've used an Android device or a Google Home device where it asks you to build a user profile. And so what it does is it locally on the device, it's learning from your voice and how you speak. And so that way it can, you know, sometimes, like I know for myself, I don't pronounce G unless it's at the beginning of the word. So like hangouts, I totally lost the G there, but it understands me now because it's listened to me a few times. And so it's more up to the device, it's not necessarily up to your application. So don't worry too much about that. So if there is an issue, it's more the device not clearly understanding them. It's not necessarily that your app didn't accurately understand. So, good question.
Is there a GUI for building the attempts flow? Like, because like on that other company that has one of these too, like when you can go in and kind of type all your attempts. Is it as you control?
Dialup Flow. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have what I'm working on? Can I like load like a giant definition that I code and then like I can have something like a CSR or something and then take modifications to it and make it live? Or is it all one or the other side?
Let's take this offline. I'll show you the interface to see if that. So the question is like he's written a conversation and he wants to see if he could just build that. And yes, you can write it locally and then like copy paste back and forth or upload, deploy kind of thing. There is an opportunity for that, but it's it's a little bit more complex than. So I can say yes. If that answers. But are you up next? Or
So some interactions that I have with the machine don't require internet access, so if I ask you to set a reminder or set up an alarm or something like that. My question is, as a user, do we have the ability to determine Google, for instance, whether the assistant uses only its own resources to serve, and otherwise you don't?
So the question is, as a developer, do I have the opportunity to use local?
As a user.
Oh, as a user.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want?
So, short of putting my phone in, say, airplane mode, for instance.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to get at is this technology, has it reached a point where the processing of my voice happens locally?
Yes. Yeah. So the question is, the processing of your voice does happen locally, and that's where like you can say, "Hey G, set a reminder," and that all happens locally because this is something that's built into the assistant. It's not having to go to the cloud to figure out that answer. So like when I'm asking for weather, that's going to have to go collect that resource. Or I'm trying to place an order for a pizza, that's not going to happen locally, or else they're never going to get my order. Things like that. So that's where certain things like what is the time, it can pull that locally. Stuff like that.
The Amazon Alexa cannot do that.
Correct.
That's why you can get on the recording for like.
Yes. 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 So Google Assistant does not always have to go to the cloud. It is built to where it can respond locally without having to make a trip. Yes.
User research involved like determining which kind of words to use. Is that like a UX thing? Do you suggest that UX designers learn how to use visual like voice design?
As part of, so the question is there something a UX designer can look at to understand what words to use as part of the conversation? Is that what you're?
Consider this a part of like the UX process, determining how to like which words to use and stuff like that.
Part of the UX process to determine what words to use in the conversation. I can definitely see it as a UX thing, yes, because you're determining the language that's being used, the persona, so that you're creating a persona of the application similar to how you're designing the UX of a website. So how you want the user flow to work and stuff like that. So yeah, I could totally see that as a UX thing. Cool. And I think that's it, unless there's any other questions. If you want to come and find me, I'll be around the rest of the day. Cool, thank you.